Hello and welcome to another video in the series Archaeology in Islam. My name is Dan Gibson and you can email me if you have any questions or comments. You can use the address at the bottom of the screen, dan@canbooks.ca. Now, during my studies of early Islamic mosques, I discovered that the very first mosques in Islam pointed to the ancient city of Petra. You can learn about that in the film The Sacred City. I also discovered that soon after that, around 87 years after the Hijrah, the first mosque appeared that pointed to an empty spot in the middle of Saudi Arabia. And as I studied that mosque and several others that followed it, I discovered that that spot was directly between the city of Petra and the city of Mecca. And so I call it the between mosques. And altogether there's over a dozen of these mosques that point directly between Petra and the city of Mecca. So something strange was happening in the Islamic world for these mosques to appear. And it was about a 70-year period when these mosques were built, and eventually it ended and passed away. The very first mosque was the mosque in Wasit in Iraq around 87 years after the Hijrah. And so I've gone back and studied that mosque to find out why did it begin this pattern of building mosques that pointed between the two cities rather than at Petra or at the city of Mecca. And this is during the time of the very first of the second Islamic civil war. And this war was between Ibn Zubair, who was in the Holy City, and he didn't like that the Muslim rulers had moved the capital to the city of Damascus, a secular city. He felt that it should point to the Holy City, to Masjid al-Haram. And so he rebelled and said, no, I'm going to be Caliph, and we're going to have the correct pointing of the mosques to this place, which clearly was the city of Petra. Now, during the fighting that took place, he became desperate, and at one point he moved the rock down to Saudi Arabia. And we can point that out. We look at it in the film to discover about when the rock was moved to Saudi Arabia. As far away from the Umayyads as he could get it, he moved that rock down. And then the people of Kufa joined him in his new Qibla, praying towards the rock in Saudi Arabia, in the empty, barren valley down there, a place called Mecca. Now, later on, a few years later, the people built a new Masjid al-Haram in that place. And so the rock was there, and eventually they had to build the Kaaba and build all the other things around it. And we have found an inscription in Saudi Arabia on the rocks. It's in a place, in a region called Humma in Namur, and it is northwest of Taif. It's about 60 kilometers from Mecca. And in this spot, someone has been writing away on the rocks. There are over 60 different inscriptions that were made and different things that were said. One of those inscriptions is very important because of what it contains. It begins with the Shahada, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. And it continues on then and talks about this is the year when Masjid al-Haram was built, constructed. And very clearly there is a date on this inscription. And the date is 78 years after the Hijrah. That's about 697 Common Era after AD, but the date is written in the inscription in the Islamic way as 78 after the Hijrah, AH. So we can clearly date when Masjid al-Haram was constructed in Mecca. We have a date, we have an inscription that was written the year that it was built. And so it's a clear witness that that is when the Masjid al-Haram exists in Mecca. Before that, all of the mosques pointed to Petra in the southern part of Jordan. Now, we have the clear dates, and so we can ask ourselves, Why in the world would this mosque come along now and point itself to the between position? Why would it do that? And so to understand that, we need to understand something about the man who built that mosque. His name was Hajjaj bin Yusuf al-Thaqafi. And he's the one that started this building and pointing between. And he's an interesting character. So we need to understand a little bit about the history that was taking place. If you remember, I said this was the Second Civil War. It began, Ibn Zubair is the one who demolished the sanctuary. He destroyed the Kaaba, knocked it all down, leveled it to the ground, just some foundation left there. And he placed the black rock on a cradle, like the word there was tabut in Arabic. It's like a cradle. There's some silk over it, and there was the black rock, and he had it there. And then the Umayyads attacked. The armies came down from Damascus. They attacked, and the war went on for several years. Now, a man named General Hajjaj, he enters the picture. He's the one later who builds this mosque. But he enters the pictures, and the Umayyads sent him down to put down the rebellion and restore law and order and to open up access to the religious sites. And al-Hajjaj, he was an extremely capable and ruthless statesman. We have existence, we know he existed, we have his seal, we have coins, and so forth from his time. He even made his own coins when he later became more powerful. He was a very strict character. He was harsh. He was demanding. He was the master who ruled, and he was widely feared. And later on, after his death, he was very controversial. People wrote about him and asked questions because he didn't always obey the caliph. He didn't always obey the rulers. And at the very heart of this controversy is this changing of the Qibla. Now, al-Hajjaj was born around 41 years after the Hijrah. He was born in Taif to a poor family. They were poor people. They were stone carriers and builders. He grew up there. People gave him a nickname. It wasn't a very nice name. They called him the little dog, Kulayb, the little dog. And that name just followed him everywhere he went. People who didn't like him, they would use that name. He later became a schoolmaster and taught the people there, the young boys, how to read and how to write. And later on, people made fun of him because he was a schoolmaster. And at that time in Islam, they were looking for warriors, looking for men who could fight. And here comes this guy who's a schoolmaster. Now, when Marwan, the caliph, assumed the throne in 64 AH, al-Hajjaj headed off to Damascus. And he was looking for to better himself, and he entered the security force of the caliph. And Abdul al-Malik noticed this guy because he was quick, he was efficient, there was a rebellion, and he restored order very quickly and brought discipline because the troops were going to mutiny, and he stepped in and had his opportunity. So they sent him off, and he fought against a rebellion. This was Mus'ab ibn Zubair. This was in Iraq. Now, this was the brother of Abdullah ibn Zubair later, who also rebelled. But first of all, this rebellion took place in Iraq with Mus'ab, and it was here in that battle that Hajjaj made himself into somebody, and they noticed who he was and how he acted. And later, the caliph entrusted him and put him in command of the army's rear guard, an important position. As the army is all marching along, they might be attacked in the back, and so the rear guard was a very important position. And during these the years that followed, he obtained noteworthy recognition because he's full of valor in the battles. He's the one who stepped in and had decisive victories because he stepped in at certain points. And so after the death of Mus'ab, then Abdul Malik sent him off to fight against Abdullah ibn Zubair in the Holy City. That's the Second Civil War. And so when the Caliph brought him in, he said, I'm putting you in charge of the army. I'm going to send you down, this would be to the city of Petra at the time, which was where the original Masjid al-Haram was located. We tell that by archaeology. We've done that in the previous videos. And the Caliph said, I'm charging you first, negotiate. You could offer him freedom even from punishment, if he will surrender and lay down his arms. Negotiate with him. Otherwise, starve him out. But the Caliph said to Al-Hajjaj, to the general Al-Hajjaj, do not shed blood in Masjid al-Haram. And we understand why, because this means Masjid al-Haram means the forbidden gathering place, the forbidden masjid, and it's forbidden to shed blood there. So he said, do not shed blood there. So Hajjaj heads off with the army. He goes down, he's taking over this war that's been going on now for some time, and he's supposed to first negotiate, and then he is supposed to starve him out. Well, negotiations failed. Hajjaj lost patience. He sent up a courier and said, can we get reinforcements, and do I have permission to attack? And the Caliph answered back, sent the reinforcements and said, yes, you have permission to attack. So the first thing he did was he set up a catapult bombardment. And I guess, he still doesn't want to shed blood in the place, so he's got this catapult, or maybe several, we're not sure, but we know at least one, and they were lobbying rocks into the very holy place to frighten the people, to scare them so before he attacks. And we have a record of this that says in the record the war took place between Ibn al-Zubair and al-Hajjaj for 6 months and 17 nights in the center of the city. The word here, center, is the button, the very bowels of the city. And one witness said, I saw the manjanik, that's the name for the catapult. It was men pulled down on one side, pulled the bar down and twanged it, and would throw the rocks in. It's like a trebuchet. He said, I saw the manjanik with which the stones were being hurled. He said the sky was thundering and lightning, and the sound of the thunder and the lightning rose above that of the stones so that it masked it. So the Kaaba was damaged. One witness said it looked like the torn bosom of a mourning woman. The siege then lasted for 7 months, and at the end, 10,000 men deserted from Ibn Zubair and joined al-Hajjaj, and so he was very successful in winning over a great deal of the army. But Ibn Zubair and his younger son were killed during the fighting. They were in a ruined building, a large building beside the Kaaba area. They had barricaded themselves into there, and in the film we show you one of the doors of that building and show you where the barricade took place. And in the film we show you the catapult stones that the archaeologists uncovered as they followed through this battle. So General Hajjaj, he won the war. But a lot of people were upset because there was violence and there was bloodshed in Masjid al-Haram. So he wasn't very popular. But the Caliph made him a hero, gave him presents, and he made him the governor of the Hajjaj and of Yemen and Yamama, and now he was the governor. And this is where he changes from being a general to being the statesman. He is now in charge of an area. And so he steps in and he takes control of this area. And during this time, he rules with an iron hand. And he gets things in order, gets people working together, gets doing things. And he is opposed by some of the companions of Muhammad. The word here is the Sahaba, the companions, the friends of Muhammad. And they oppose why he shed blood in the Masjid al-Haram. Why? Because of the way he rules, and so they oppose him. So he begins to persecute them. And during his lifetime, he killed 4 of the companions of Muhammad. Now, in 75 years after the Hijrah, the Caliph appointed him to be not only the ruler of those areas previously, but he added to it the whole province of Iraq, and this now included the whole eastern part of the Islamic world. basically he's in control of all of this. And during the next few years, he puts down some bloody rebellions and he rules it with an iron fist. But now he is a really, really important ruler in the Islamic world. And it is at this point that the first mosque he has built in Iraq, in the city of Wasit, where he's ruling from, they're going to build a major mosque, a gathering place for many, many people, and it is the major mosque in the city, and it is the mosque in Wasit. And so he has this mosque built. And the amazing thing is that he does not choose to point his mosque towards the city of Petra, as everybody else was doing. He did not choose to point his mosque to Mecca, as a few of the new rebels are doing at the time. He is stuck. Where is he going to point his mosque? And so he points it directly between Petra and Mecca. He doesn't want to choose either of them. And he's followed by mosques in Damascus and Basra, the desert palaces, the city of Haran, and even in Raqqa, one of the main mosques in that city. They point to the between position. Over a dozen mosques all point between. Now, why? Why would he do this? Well, obviously, he doesn't want to point to the mosque to the city of Petra. That's the city he invaded. That's the city he destroyed. He bombarded it. He used the catapult stones to knock it down what was there. That was the city of rebels. And besides, Petra had pagan temples in it. It had the temple to Hubal. It had the temple to Allat. It had all these temples in it, and he disdained that. He wanted a more pure Islam, and that's a terrible place. And besides, the Black Rock isn't even there. And everything's knocked down. So, should he then point his mosque to Mecca? Well, there's a bunch of rebels. They're still holding out down there, and that's where the Black Rock is, but that's not Masjid al-Haram. He doesn't accept that one, so he chooses his own middle location. I will put my Qibla will be there. And during his lifetime, that's where the mosques pointed that he had built. That's where they pointed their Qibla. And now, he was criticized. And the Caliph Walid was criticized because Caliph Walid allowed him to do this, to point his mosque there. So later writers like Jahiz, they include the setting of the Qibla of Wasit among the misdeeds of Caliph Walid. So they're looking back some years later. He's writing about the Caliph Walid, and he said this guy was not a good caliph. And one of the things he points out is that Caliph Walid allowed the setting of the Qibla of Wasit as a misdeed of Caliph Walid. So this is Jahiz writing about Caliph Walid and pointing out the Qibla issue. So we know even from the history books that the setting of the Qiblas was a controversial thing, and later writers are pointing this out to us. Now, how did Hajjaj convince the Caliph to let him pick his own Qibla? Well, if you look at his history, you'll discover he had an inside track. He had a daughter who he married off to the son of the Caliph, and that's Mansur. Caliph Mansur was married to the daughter of Al-Hajjaj. So these guys are all working together, and they're not terribly religious in some ways, and so the Qiblas during this time were different. And that's what I find astounding, that during this period we have some mosques, brand new mosques being built that still point to Petra. There are some brand new mosques that are being built that are now pointing to Mecca. And we also have Hajjaj building his mosques now pointing directly between. And so we can go back in history and we can learn about these things and realize what happened. So what are the mosques? Well, let's look at them very, very briefly. I'll just list them for you. You go to Wasit, 87 years after the Hijrah, and that is in Iraq. The next one we find is in Damascus, in Syria itself, and in Basra, in Syria as well. Hayr al-Gharbi in Syria, Also Hayr al-Sharqi, also in Syria. Baalbek in Lebanon, the main mosque, points to a between position. Raqqa, as we said, main mosque in Raqqa points to a between position. This is in Syria. Up in Turkey, in Haran, there's the mosque and the university. They point to a between position. In Jordan, we have some of the forts there. We have in Udra, we have the Umayyad, in Udra we have the Ottoman fort, and it's not you're not going to look at the fort we look there. There's the Roman fort that's all around it, but right in the middle, the Umayyads build a mosque, and you see it's at angles to the rest of it because it's pointing directly between Petra and Mecca. Khirbet Khan is Zabib is in Jordan as well. Qasr Ain al-Sil is in Jordan. Al-Fudian is up in Mafraq in Jordan. All these point between. Qasr al-Qarna in Jordan points between. And Azraq Fort in Mosque, you'll see it. There's the fort. It's again, it's an old fort that's there, but the mosque is at odds with it. It's turned a little bit because it points directly between these two. So the General Hajjaj has a huge influence on the development of Islam during his lifetime. He's very important in manipulating and changing things at the time. But after he died, his influence gradually waned, his popularity disappeared, and the popularity of Masjid al-Haram in Mecca with the black stone, it's growing to be more and more popular. And eventually, no one builds mosques anymore that point between. And soon, that's forgotten about. And we had no clue about this happening until archaeologists and historians began to uncover ancient foundations of mosques. And it gives us a glimpse of what happened. And so we go and we look at the histories that are written down, and we begin to see, now we understand from the history why some of these mosques point the way they do. In the same way, parallel mosques in North Africa and in Spain that we've talked about, they only were there for a couple of years, and then it passed out of popularity. And eventually, all of the mosques all around the world pointed to the city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia. And the others, the Petra, the Between, and the Parallel, were all forgotten, and only Mecca survived. This is why it is important to understand archaeology and Islam. Now, that brings us to another interesting question. Why is Petra not mentioned in the Quran? Many people have written and asked me that, and it's a good question. And the answer is, it is mentioned. Petra is in the Quran. And we will cover that in the next YouTube video in this series, Archaeology and Islam. I'm Dan Gibson, and thank you for watching.